So the tickler here is evolution happens,
Yes.
and indeed it does happen. And real quick before we get too far into it, I want to bring up Dale Manor again. Do any of you know Dale Manor? Okay, you've met him face to face.
What?
You've met him face to face.
Oh, he and I used to work together. He was
Okay.
preaching in Ojai, and I was preaching in Ventura.
Okay.
We had a good, close relationship, and I've been in touch with him since he's now back at Harding University.
It was Harding, not Freed Hardeman then.
No, it's for Harding University.
Okay. Well, he's retired now though, right?
And not as far as I know, but he,
Oh, really?
I don't think he probably could be.
Okay. Well, so knowing him and he's a really tall guy.
Yeah,
Like, here somewhere?
about 4'11", maybe 5 foot if he stretches.
I think he's like 5'3" or 5'4"
I don't
something.
think he's that tall.
When he was doing his work over in Israel, on one of his trips to Bostonia to speak to us, he talked about the ossuaries, the bone boxes, okay? You know, when the Bible says that so-and-so slept with their fathers, that's actually a very literal statement. Because the way it worked is they would have the cave with the platforms, and there was a little stone for the head and a stone that the feet would go against. They would wrap the body up, put it in there, close the door, and leave for 6 months. Because it's not going to be pretty in there for 6 months. And they come back, and all of the soft tissue would be gone and done, and it would just be the bones. And they'd pull the ossuary out, they'd break the bones up, and put your bones into the bone box with your grandpa, and your great-grandpa, and your great-great-grandpa. So you're literally sleeping with the fathers, right? Well, Dale, being who he was, archaeologist extraordinaire, he had to go in and lay down on one of those platforms and to lay his head up there, and he was too tall for the thing. He didn't fit well. It was a little bit too small for him. People have evolved over the past hundreds of years. And one thing is, generally speaking, we are tending to become taller over time. Ironically, then we get to a certain age and we start becoming shorter again. What's that all about? I used to be 6'2".
Gravity.
Now I'm 6'1".
Oh, yeah.
I don't like that. Anyway, evolution does happen. Let's talk about this some. This is from the evolution guy himself, Charles Darwin. In the 6th chapter, I enumerated the chief objections which might be justly urged against the views maintained in this volume. Most have now been discussed. One, namely the distinctiveness of specific forms and their not being blended together by innumerable transitional links, is a very obvious difficulty. What's he talking about? Any of you heard of Archaeopteryx? Archaeopteryx is a fossil of a bird-like thing with wings and feathers, but sort of a long tail, and it doesn't really have a beak. It's more like the head of a lizard. And for the longest time, the paleontologists tried to show Archaeopteryx as a link between lizards and birds.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at an Archaeopteryx fossil, looks like a bird. And I would tell you that I could bury an alligator lizard and a sparrow in my
There you go.
backyard, leave them for 20 years, go dig them up, and it may be a little difficult to
Tell
sort
me.
out the difference between the two without really looking at them carefully. And there's also the idea of proven design. I mean, a bird that has a mouth like a lizard so it can catch things, maybe with its tongue, this could have been something that God designed. An implication of gradualism is that the fossil record would show slowly changing forms. So whatever something goes from this form to this form, there would be all these gradations in
Right.
between, where it changes a little, it changes a little more, it changes a little more, and then all of a sudden you're going to call it something else. All the intermediate stages of evolution should be buried as fossils, and we should be able to unearth them.
Right.
Now, Darwin himself was at pains, that previous slide, to explain that the fossil record was incomplete. The conditions under which a fossil can form are such that it is by no means a common event. You realize that for something to become a fossil is rare. Normally, when things die, they pretty much get completely returned to nature.
Right.
Combine this with the fact that we only nibble at the edges of the rock strata. I'm not sure that's completely true, which have fossils in them, and it's easy to accept that our knowledge of the fossil record is far from complete. Well, this is from Evolution, the Great Debate. That's this. Sydney just texted me and asked how I'm doing. Should I just text her back and go, I'm busy, leave me alone? Evolution, the Great Debate. The transition species predict that we would see fine gradations as life evolves and transitions from one form to another, from one species to a subsequent species.
Right.
We do not see transitional forms.
Nope.
Rather, we see life divided into distinct groups consistent with biblical teaching.
Right. They, never mind.
Now, I've got a few slides. I'm going to move through them fairly quickly. These are based on Bierbauer, my paleontology textbook. And actually, I would like to read these directly from Bierbauer. So, in the chapter of Patterns of Evolution, page 173 of Bierbauer, I approach the subject of rapid evolution rather gingerly. Many of the major animal phyla, classes, and orders pop abruptly into the fossil record. Means there weren't transition species
Right.
leading up to them. Their ancestry, if known at all, is vague, and they are much more advanced than the presumed ancestral types. This is an evolutionist writing
Proving that
about
there is no evolution.
what you actually see.
Yeah.
One faction, now in the minority, claims some sort of special sort of mutation, or extremely rapid mutation rates, account for these saltations. Some of the members of this school hold that what seems an extreme view about the nature and origin of taxonomic categories. I have no wish, listen to this, I have no wish to bog down here in philosophical or semantical problems. There's that pesky philosophical argument thing
you
again.
want to talk about it.
Now, I'm going to add a little note before we move on in our sacred reading today. If the fossil record says fast, what line of evidence does the evolutionist have to refute this evidence and support the gradualism theory? What do they have other than the fossil record? Ponder that. Moving on. I have no wish to bog down here in philosophical or semantic problems, but briefly they hold that the major categories, phyla, classes, and so on, are separated by unbridgeable gaps. Therefore, they arose in a sudden macromutation, a single individual, a hopeful monster. Such mutations have not yet been conclusively identified in recent populations. In other words, we're saying that the mutations happen, but we don't see them happening.
They've been trying to find the missing link forever.
I know. If they do occur, most would not be viable without commensurate buffering changes in the gene system. I have no idea what that means. If they do occur in viable form, this is why I got a B in paleontology and not an A. They must be selected in the normal fashion from the gene combinations in an interbreeding species population. Even if selection pressures are very high, the macromutation will change in frequency at a finite rate. A mutant coral with six-fold symmetry, radial symmetry, would still belong to a species with fourfold symmetry. A mutant coral with six-fold radial symmetry would still belong to a species with fourfold symmetry.
So you're saying there could have been evolution, but it was really fast.
Is a man with 6 fingers on each hand a macromutant?
Huh.
By the way, what movie?
The man with 6 fingers on each hand.
Good name.
Count Rugen,
Princess Bride.
The Princess Bride.
Oh. Missed that one.
So, I guess the question is, first of all, why are they talking about it when they can't actually see it happening? And why are they skirting around this fact that they see in nature that things pop up suddenly?
Yeah,
That they don't have all these transitions leading up to them?
right. Like they're discounting their own theory.
So a little bit more in Bierbauer, and then we're going to go back to Darwin, and then we're going to go to where we actually see evolution happening. Since in some cases the initial steps, usually hypothetical through lack of fossils,
Right.
hint,
Yeah.
seem to be inadaptive, Simpson, whoever that was, suggested that they were the result of a drift in very small populations, a drift that moved against selection until a new adaptive significance was established. This latter idea is interesting, but no one has yet demonstrated positively that it happened or even that it is likely to happen. So there you have it. Well, this is what we believe, but we're having a really hard time with the facts demonstrating this.
Finding evidence for
Back to Darwin really quick. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. Now, this was written by Charles Darwin in Origin of the Species back in the early 1800s.
Yeah, and that's when it had just started. They just started collecting these things, so he didn't know.
We're now in the 2020s,
Right. People have been digging up everything.
and we're still having the same problem, even though we have seen a lot more of the geological record.
Right. And they haven't found anything to link them
Well,
to,
but we
to
have.
show mutation, to show a
We-
progression.
But we have found it.
Oh, yeah?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this is
Oh, yeah.
from Evolution and the Myth of Creationism. Now this is a book
The
that's
myth of creation.
the myth of creation.
Yeah.
This book is trying to tell us that creationism is a myth,
Right.
that evolution is the deal. And here is their silver tuna, horses.
Right.
This group provides, this is all true. Okay, what we're saying right here is true. This whole statement is absolutely true. This group provides the most complete series of fossils in an animal lineage. It shows both evolutionary trends and diversity through time. The evolution of the horses offers an excellent, I agree, an excellent example of continuing adaptation to a changing environment, an evolution that left many transitional fossils. I agree.
Me too. We still have all those horses.
This lavish fossil record speaks loudly and clearly to the fact that evolution has occurred. I agree. And here's what we did. We evolved from horses to horses.
That's about it, yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
Right. Yeah, that's really much
Okay.
it, all right.
So, folks, put your singing voices on and sing along with me.
Oh,
Mystery.
1, 2, 3. A horse is a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse, of course, that is, of course, unless the horse is the famous Mr. Ed. Okay.
Wilbur.
Wilbur. I forgot that. That's great. There's Davy and Goliath. I don't know, Davy. But Davy. Anyway. So horses begat horses, begat horses, begat horses.
Right.
Now, I used to work with a gentleman named Bob Gutzler. He was a PhD geologist and a lawyer, interestingly. And he sat in the office next to mine. He definitely an evolutionist, probably totally atheist. And he and I would have some interesting conversations. And one day I was commenting to Bob that, one of the problems is we have a hard time finding the transition species with some of these lineages of evolution. And Bob says, well, we have identified many transition species in ostracods.
Crustaceans,
Yeah, these are crustaceans that range from this big
little teeny ones.
to this big,
Yeah.
okay? Ostracoda is a class of crustaceans varying from 0.2 of a millimeter, 0.008 inches, to 30 millimeters, 1.2 inches. Sometimes known as seed shrimp because of their appearance.
Right.
Some 65,000 species have been identified, grouped into several orders. 65,000 species of ostracods. Can you imagine all the transition species
Right. That'd be a lot.
that occur with ostracods?
Yeah. Shrimp.
So try to sing the song. An ostracod is an ostracod. Don't even try. And after all of these 65,000 species, and all of these transitions as they have evolved, and they have evolved,
They're still like that.
they changed from ostracods to ostracods.
There you go.
That's it.
And that's where we see transition species, is in these groups that
Aren't changing.
change to
Or
the same
have.
thing.
Yeah, the same thing.
Well, here we are, Darwin's finches.
Oh, the finches, yeah.
Do you know what his basis for dividing them into different species was?
Their beaks?
Their beaks.
Yeah.
The shape, did you just look at the slide or did you
No,
just
I read about it. I remember reading
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I had to ask.
Yeah.
We were driving up to Lake Shasta once. This was in about 1974 or 5. No. Yeah, so yeah, right around 73 maybe. And I was just in grade school, junior high maybe by that time, but I still had kind of a geologist heart. And there, some of you might remember 1971, the Sylmar earthquake,
Yeah.
right? Well, actually, no, it was in the early 80s
Yeah.
because I had learned about this in college.
Right.
And we were, as late teens, early 20s, my folks and my brother and I and some friends were going up to Lake Shasta to spend a week on a houseboat. And we're driving up through the LA area, and I commented something about we were coming into the Sylmar area where there was this earthquake. And just as I said that, we came around a bend in the freeway and there was a sign that said Sylmar. And my friends are like, oh, you just saw the sign. I'm like, no, I didn't. I actually knew this. They didn't believe me. And it bothered me. That's why I asked about, and with Darwin, it was the beaks on the finches.
Yeah.
So different beaks had different capabilities. Some for seeds, some for cracking nuts, some for whatever all the things were.
Yeah.
Leaves, buds and fruit, grubs, tool-using finch, insects, seeds, whatever. And now for the rest of the day, you're going to have this song in your head, a finch is a finch, of course.
Okay, of course.
They were still finches. They didn't change to cows
No.
because of the different foods they were eating. They stayed finches. And by the way, this is interesting, a photograph of those finches. They still exist. As far as I know, they're in a freezer somewhere being
Darwin's finches?
Darwin's finches.
Yeah. Yeah, all that stuff, he preserved it well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we do, is we preserve stuff. See, for me,
I
when
think
I
he
preserve
stuffed
stuff,
them and stuff while he was on the boat.
I
Yeah.
preserve rocks, which are really easy because they don't tend to degrade
Yeah.
badly. Anyway, what does the Bible say? In Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 through 25, God creates the animals. And he creates them in 5 groups: the fishes and the great sea monsters, the winged birds, the cattle, the creeping things, and the beasts of the field. And he makes them all to reproduce after their kind.
Right.
Now that allows for evolution. If you're more comfortable, use the term adaptation. Within those groups, folks, that's what we see in the fossil record, is just this plethora of different bird species. And when we trace fossils back, we can kind of see where some of them, what was I going to say? I was just looking at the slide and thinking about how much time, and I'm way ahead of schedule.
You can see where the species progressed, you mean?
We see how they progressed from earlier forms,
Yeah,
see how they've changed over time, but they've remained birds.
all right.
So they still fit the biblical description of birds of the air, or winged birds. That's what we see in the fossil record. Archaeopteryx is not a link between the winged birds and the creeping things, which would be, I think, a lizard. Unless it's a really big lizard, then it might be a beast of the field. If it's a monitor lizard, but then if it's an alligator, it is a fish or a great sea monster. God's semantics here is also something that we wouldn't necessarily have our heads wrapped completely around, okay? There are some things that I can conceive could fit in a couple of different of these groups. It doesn't really matter because we see them coming from themselves and changing over time within themselves. We don't see them turning into something completely different.
All right.
Any thoughts?
You're saying a robin doesn't become an eagle?
Well, okay.
Then we wouldn't have a robin.
Here's a concept, and this may come up a little bit later in this. If a robin became an eagle, would there still be a robin?
And there would be a link in there somewhere.
Really?
One would think.
Yeah. Couldn't just come from robin to eagle all of a sudden.
I mean, maybe it goes from robin to
hawk,
crow
crow, hawk,
to,
eagle.
well, it's going to have to go to like a kestrel, and then a Cooper's hawk, and then a red tail, because that's
Right.
getting bigger. And then from there, which is bigger, a golden eagle or a bald eagle?
The bald eagle is as big as it gets, isn't it?
Okay, so then it go to a golden eagle, then it will go to a bald eagle. And then that weird eagle from some other continent that's just like huge. They're like this big.
Maybe a buzzard in there somewhere.
And then God had a sense of humor and made the buzzard.
Yeah.
He also made some of us bald. Same reason.
Yeah, you go.
I was taking I love photographing raptors, birds of prey. And I was photographing a bird over the La Jolla Indian Reservation one day, and I was really excited until I looked closely at the pictures, and it was just a stupid buzzard. I just deleted the pictures. It's like, whatever.
Well, we adapt to our environment, we change. That doesn't mean everybody changes the same way we do. And people that live in say Africa, it's hot, it's, their skin, their everything.
The shape of their nose.
Everything.
Right,
The
right.
shape of their nose.
But we didn't all.
My nose
That way.
is designed for somebody that lives in a cold climate. My nostrils are close together and they're much narrower. And that way, as I inhale through my nose, the air has to have more time. It has more time to warm up before it gets into my lungs. Somebody in Africa, an African American, will tend to have a flatter, much wider nose with much more flared nostrils because the climate there is such that it helps to cool things
Cool the
down,
air. Yeah, that's right.
to create
The opposite.
more. In some circles today, I could have this conversation. I would be referred to as a racist.
Racist!
But we do see exactly that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go into mutation theory a little bit. I'm just going to throw a couple of numbers at you. Cells mutate approximately every 10 to the 7th cell divisions. So that's 10 to followed by 7 zeros or something to that effect. Several, billions or even quadrillions
Not
of cell
fathomable.
divisions,
Yeah.
a cell will mutate. Okay. Now, that single cell mutating will not, it may create absolutely no effect on anything. I mean, in the time that we've been sitting here, all of us have had
Cells die.
a number of mutations occur
Oh, yeah.
in our bodies. For that mutation to stick, you have to get a series of mutations either together or in series to actually produce a meaningful change, something that you can see.
Right.
And it's additive. If you want 2 mutations, it's 10 to the 14th. If you want 3, it's 10 to the 21st. If you want 4, it's 10 to the 28th. And at 10 to the 28th
You got too many zeros.
cell divisions and those 4 mutations, the way one of the authors I read put it is that may produce no more than a wavy edge on a bent wing of a fly. So that's one aspect. Mutations are rare. I mean, they're happening all the time, but in the grand scheme of the actual number of cells, cell divisions, and mutations that occur, they don't occur often. 10 to the 7th cell divisions, you get a mutation. That's one aspect. Another aspect of it is, can you think of some condition that you've seen in people because of mutations?
Well, childbirth,
Okay.
they were, they'd come up with some crazy things.
And how does that go for the child?
Not, some things they were able to correct. A lot of times they die.
Most mutations are identified by the abnormality or disease they
Birth
create
defect.
in the organism.
Yeah.
In other words, they're not good.
Yeah.
And there's one beneficial mutation that several biologists have been able to identify. And for them, it's the only beneficial mutation they've been able to identify. Sickle cell anemia
Oh, okay. A lot of black people have
can
it.
be considered a beneficial mutation because it inhibits by about 75% the ability of the person with sickle cell anemia to contract malaria.
Oh. Well,
So
that's
if you have sickle cell anemia, which still might kill you,
yeah,
it at least makes it harder
to get malaria in the
to get
jungle.
malaria. And
Wow,
one of
that's
the
terrific.
biologists that was speaking about this,
Huh.
in what I read, said, if that's what you want to call a beneficial mutation, you can have it.
Yeah.
So mutation theory, I like to say there's not enough time and materials. So there are approximately 4.32 times 10 to the 17th seconds since the beginning of the universe. Okay? If it's 13.7 billion years old, it's probably much less than that. There are approximately 10 to the 80th atoms in the universe. In the universe. I mean, that's an astronomically big number.
Yeah.
But you can look at 10 to the 80th on a piece of paper and go, well, I can kind of wrap my head around that a little bit. Now that's in the universe. Obviously, far, far, far fewer atoms just here on Earth. Okay? I don't know how many exactly. And I wouldn't even try to figure that out. I would waste a lot of time and never come up with a good answer. But with that number of atoms, and now we're talking about 4.5 billion years only here, so that's probably 10 to the 8th or 9th seconds, whatever. All of a sudden, the idea of a cell mutation or some series of mutations every 10 to the 28th cell divisions, creating meaningful and beneficial changes there's not enough time since the beginning of the earth. There's not enough atoms in the earth. And you even have to limit it there to only those atoms involved with life,
Right.
which is a small fraction of the total atoms in the earth. Folks, this doesn't work.
No.
You can't change things through this natural chance evolution
Right.
from one thing to another. Most everything that actually experiences a real change is going to die,
Right.
or it's going to lose its ability to pass on the changes.
And
I mean, some dude with 2 heads or 3 legs or something weird, a hand coming out the side of his head, he's not going to be allowed to mate. I'm sorry. It's just not going to work out, right? So it's something that it's untenable.
Right.
It mathematically, mutations cannot, for what we know about them, cannot account for the diversity of life.
Right.
And it can't take us from single protein molecules about 2 billion years ago. So now we're even less time
Right.
to, which is what the scientists say, to,
The
to
time
people.
it would take to get, yeah. It doesn't.
So that's kind of, that's, in a nutshell, that's mutation theory and how it really doesn't work. Here's what I think. We've got about 15 minutes before we would break for lunch. If it's okay with you,
There he is.
so he said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would use the first 55 minutes determining the proper questions to ask. I wish I could say something like that with confidence. Let's hit at least the first point of intelligent design. So this is where a growing number of scientists, including Dr. Guillermo Gonzalez, astrobiologist and author of Privileged Planet, are beginning to recognize that chance alone is not adequate to explain the coming about of all things. It doesn't work.
No, it's absurd. Right?
There has to be a design. There has to be a
Definitely.
mind, a pressure, a control behind the things going on.
Definitely. Yeah.
This is a book by Michael Behe called Darwin's Black Box. It's a little easier to manage than like The Privileged Planet or any Stephen Hawking book. And it talks about, among other things, the concept of irreducible complexity. Okay? And this is where he talks about how modern biological systems, we're able to see right down to the atom in
Right.
these systems. We're not constrained to what we can look at in our hands or even under a microscope anymore. Now we can get right down to the basic building blocks of life systems, and we can look at them.
All right.
And one of the systems that he looks at, well, first, Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 24. O Lord God, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do such works and mighty acts as yours? Apply that passage to the stuff we're about to look at. Who but God can make these things and make them work the way that they work? And we're going to start at the microscopic level, the flagellum motor.
Right.
This is the little
The
little thing that will drive a paramecium around in the liquid.
Yeah.
What you see under the microscope is a little whip-like thing that goes around like a propeller and it moves it around. Well, what's making that little whip-like thing turn around is literally basically a little tiny motor.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's a big monkey wrench in Darwinian evolution because of this concept of irreducible complexity. It's 50 nanometers in diameter. It's built of about 40 complex protein molecules. It can spin both ways, rotates at 200 to 1,000 RPM.
Isn't that something?
And it's composed of a paddling mechanism, so it needs to meet the requirements for a swimming system. It's composed of at least 3 parts: a paddle, a rotor, and a motor. And it is irreducibly complex. Gradual evolution of this thing faces mammoth hurdles. Now, this is from Michael Behe in Darwin's Black Box.
Right. They can't break it down.
You can't break it down to anything more simple and have anything useful.
Right.
They figured out one possible thing. If they took away about 5 or 6 of the protein molecules, there was some use it might have, but not really. Think about cases where you're removing a component of the system. And one of the things they like to use is this idea of these arches. So even cases where removing a certain component in an organic system will cause the system to fail do not demonstrate that the system couldn't have been formed in step-by-step evolutionary process. By analogy, a stone arch or stone arches are irreducibly complex.
They are.
You can't remove one.
Right.
If you remove one, it collapses. Yet we build them easily enough. Listen to this. Yet we build them easily enough, one stone at a time, by building over centering that is removed afterwards. Any thoughts? We build them often enough by building over centering, that was our idea,
Right.
that we can remove afterwards.
Right.
That's design, that's not chance.
That's right.
You don't throw a bunch of rocks
Yeah.
into a canyon and look, oh, look at the arch that I just built.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen that way.
No, you have to design that thing.
And the flagellum motor can be viewed kind of the same way.
You know?
You can't take part of it away and have anything useful. So this thing had to come about pretty much as it is.
Miraculously.
And biological evolution doesn't allow that. Because supposedly, this whole thing started with some protein molecules in some primordial soup that maybe got activated by a stroke of lightning. There's a lot of different theories about how it happened. There's another slide on this. And now we're kind of getting back to the philosophy, okay? The general professional literature on the bacterial flagellum is rich, with thousands of papers published on the subject over the years. That isn't surprising. The flagellum is a fascinating biological or biophysical system. Yet here again, evolutionary literature is totally missing on how this thing came about. Okay?
It was a pop-up.
It popped into existence
Yeah.
because somebody made it.
Yeah.
They went to the store, they bought the flagellum motor kit, took it home, got their glue, paper towel, their thinner so they could clean the surfaces, and they took out all the parts and said, okay, this goes here, and they put this thing together. Now, obviously God said, there it is.
Yeah.
Irreducibly complex is an important concept when we look at biological evolution. And what Behe talks about is the fact that we can look now at the very base level of these biological, biophysical, biochemical systems. And we can understand what's going on, and we can see that they are
Created.
at their minimum functional state.
Right.
But it's 40 protein molecules. It's not one or two
Complex,
molecules that
yeah.
just happen to pop together. I'm going to cover this next one quickly, and then we're going to do the last part. Now we're moving up to the macro level, from the microscopic in intelligent
Oh, yeah.
design.
Yeah.
Sea slug versus sea anemone. Any of you ever heard of this? You may know that sea slugs feed on sea anemones. But there's a lot more to the story than that. Does anybody know?
I think I read something about it, I can't remember.
Okay. Well, sea anemones have these stinging cells. It's basically like a harpoon.
Right,
And when a fish, except for a clownfish,
right.
comes in contact with them,
They get stuff.
they discharge,
Yeah.
they stick into the organism, and that stuns the organism, and the anemone can pull it in and consume it. Basically, it's like a harpoon, a line, and some method to actually discharge this thing,
Right.
okay? Sea slugs feed on sea anemones. However, the nematocysts, stinging cells, do not discharge and are not digested by the sea slug.
Huh.
Rather, they are swept along through ciliated tubes connected to the sea slug's stomach, and then are arranged and stored in the cerata to be used for the sea slug's defense.
Oh, wow.
So here's the way this had to happen. The highly complicated series of modifications that would have had to occur to produce this incredible relationship completely defies evolutionary explanation.
Yeah.
First of all, in order to prevent the stinging cells from exploding, the sea slug would have to evolve some sort of chemical means to temporarily neutralize them.
Right.
The sea slug would also have to evolve a new digestive system, which would digest the tissues of the anemone, but not the stinging cells.
Yeah.
The sea slug would also have to cleverly evolve the sophisticated ciliated tubes and pouches, as well as the highly complex mechanism for arranging, storing, and maintaining the stinging cells.
Huh. Wow.
Finally, and contrary to evolutionary expectations, the anemone would have to endorse the sea slug's plans by refraining from evolving countermeasures.
Yeah,
That is one of the funniest statements
it is.
in this book. It's the old question, if we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys?
Yeah.
We were talking about the coelacanth, this dinosaur fish that originally by the fossils they thought was one of the links of the first critters to walk up on land. And the question there, of course, in the early 1900s, 1930s, somebody caught a live coelacanth off of South Africa. So if the coelacanth still exists, but the coelacanth was the critter that developed legs and walked up on land,
Right.
why were there still coelacanth fishes?
Exactly.
Except as I was commenting to Max, you can imagine this bunch of coelacanths, and a couple of them suddenly have legs and they walk up there, and the rest of the coelacanths are like, I want to do that. There's a lot of systems that we can look at like that.
Yeah.
Why are there still monkeys if we came from them?
Right.
Why are there still coelacanths if they walked up on land? Why are, and you can find different systems of species where supposedly something did something, but the original something is still around. And I suppose there might be an explanation for that, but one explanation is that it is consistent with biblical teaching
Yeah.
that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. 10 to the minus 30th second
Spoken.
inflation, there it is.
Yeah.
That God created the animals to reproduce after their kind. So that is the explanation.
Yeah.
And by faith, at least, a better model
Right.
for why we don't see the transition species in the fossil record. That God created all these things. How did the verse say? O Lord God, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do such works and mighty acts as yours? And there we have our explanation for the flagellum motor and for the ability of the sea slug to cop the stinging cells from a sea anemone and use them for its own defense.
Yeah.
And so many other things. This one, the sea anemone thing, just really floored me. And then that statement about the sea anemone endorsing its plans by refraining from evolving countermeasures. That is where we're going to stop for lunch. When we come back, we're going to continue intelligent design at a cosmic level. And this is where we're going to look at all of the characteristics of our position in the galaxy, in our solar system that are particularly supportive of our life, of our survivability. But then we're going to take it a step beyond that. And I think you'll like it. So, lunchtime.